This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. And I'm coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley bottoms where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long, as we say. But this presentation is of In Church, INN, and Montana Dan is here, and we're the two elders at In Church. And today we've asked Rick Jore to join us. Rick is from Montana also, so it's me, and I'm talking to two fellows from Montana, both of them former state legislators. And because they're former state legislators, they have in their wheelhouse and that their attention is drawn to what happens in the Montana legislature, among other things that affect their lives heavily. I want to do this first, if I may, Dan, just for fun. You and I have been on and made these presentations. I can briefly introduce Montana Dan. He represented House District 62 in Montana from 2011 to 2013, which is the area around Livingston, Montana. Livingston, Montana is just north of Yellowstone Park, into Montana, of course. And then he ran a couple other times. Both of the men that I'm with today are conservatives, of course. When I say conservative, I mean they want to conserve what is good. What is good, not just everything, but what is right. May I say what is constitutional? That's Montana Dan. Then there's Rick Jore. Rick is the guest we have today with us. Rick is a former Montana House of Representatives legislator, and he served from 1995 to 2001, 2007 to 2009. Now, he grew up near Ronan, Montana. I should say above Ronan, Montana, because that's the Flathead Valley down there, and he was not right down in the valley, but he attended North Idaho College way back in the 70s. That's ancient history now, Rick. And, I mean, we're getting back to 50 years ago or some crazy thing.
Yeah.
But he also, Rick owns the West Slope Trout Company, and he's been producing trout ever since he was in high school. Rick, did you start in the FFA or something doing that, or how did that start?
No, I was not in the FFA in school. It started as a youngster. Literally, I was 13 years old when I asked my dad to push out a pond, and I used the pick and a shovel to dig a ditch to it to get water to it. And it was just an interest I had because I grew up. My brothers and I would walk from our home here to all the neighboring creeks and fish, and that was that was the way we grew up. We didn't have electricity actually at that time. Didn't get electricity till I was 16, so we spent all our times fishing, and I would bring them fish home in a bucket and put them in my pond. It was a hobby, but it's turned into a business. I ended up with these and I intentionally did this. I thought these were an isolated population of West Slope cutthroat trout, which is the native trout of Montana and now the state fish. And I ended up with this pure strain. So there's kind of a demand for them from that perspective as a pure strain native West Slope cutthroat.
So if people want that particular species of trout, then you can deliver them. Is that right? I mean, you've got a way on your pickup truck or something to deliver fish.
Right. I've got a couple of tanks. I'm actually, some of my deliveries are a long ways away, actually over in Dan's area. I do a lot of Bozeman anyway, not over the pass so much. So I haul 2 tanks and pull a trailer with them, Brent, now.
Oh, well, things are getting better. Well, yeah. we don't want anybody to think that the fellows that I'm interviewing are not environmentally conscious. That's why they're into increasing the population, for example, of this particular Montana state fish called the, what'd you say, what was it?
They're West Slope cutthroat, Brent,
Okay.
and I'm a big fan of Lewis and Clark, and they were first recorded by Lewis at the Falls of the Great Falls of the Missouri.
So did he have one of his boys draw pictures of them?
He drew pictures of them and had it's fascinating how well trained he was in those sciences.
Uh-huh.
And he would draw pictures of them and describe them scientifically. And he had a young man on the expedition, Silas Goodrich, and he was fascinated. Silas Goodrich would catch fish for him out on the prairies, and because they had so much meat, buffalo and elk and all that they sometimes wanted to change a diet. And Silas, according to Lewis, was fond of fishing.
Oh.
And so he caught these. The first time they recorded these again was when Goodrich caught some at the Great Falls there.
So this is a species that has been there a long time, obviously, probably thousands of years. But you sell your fish not for eating purposes, but for the stock ponds and creeks and whatnot, right?
Yeah, all private. I do sell some eggs because of the genetics to the state of Idaho, but the state of Montana has their own strain of West Slope cutthroat, so I've not sold fish or eggs to them.
Uh-huh.
But almost all my customers are private pond owners and grandpas and dads wanting to make the kids happy.
Well, now I assume I'll ask, do you have a website?
No, I don't. I used to, but I don't maintain it anymore. I don't even advertise because it's just kind of I've got a clientele now that's repeating, and I get new clients, I do have something on, I think it's on Facebook. My daughter put something on Facebook, and I think it's still there because I get inquiries from there.
Oh, okay. So people can look you up on Facebook?
I think so. I don't maintain it or I don't do anything with it, but I know my price list is there because I've had people call me and indicate they found me on the Facebook page.
Okay, and his name is, by the way, again, Rick Jore. Rick also, I want to throw this in, Rick, because I've seen your setup. Rick worked in a sawmill for about 10 years. And now he's got a portable sawmill that he saws lumber with, and he likes to build things. So he's a man that is multi-variegated in his interest. And his most intense interest, it seems, though, having talked to you, of course, is government. And when you were running one time for the state legislature, it came down to blame near a tie. Well, that was in 2004, I believe, wasn't it?
It was, Brent, yes.
Yeah. And if you would have won that election, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, whether or not you won or did not win, and there were 7 contested votes, am I right?
That's correct, yep. The Montana Supreme Court it went to.
And it made a difference because the legislature, if you'd have won, your party would have had a 1-vote majority in the state legislature. And if you lost, it would have been a 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats. Well, tell me about that a little bit. I want to know.
Well, just briefly, and that was an interesting experience. The race, I had resigned from the Republican Party, mostly through frustration. I'm not a fan of consensus and compromise and conciliation. I don't think that will get you anywhere. There are certain principles that are absolute and they ought not to be compromised. And so after 3 terms in the legislature as a Republican, I said, man, that's enough of this. And I wanted to bring focus to the rule of law, which in my view is upholding the Constitution being an expression of the rule of law. Any action by government having to be sanctioned by that document. Well, so in 2004, I was actually running under the Constitution Party, Brent. We had worked hard to get signatures to qualify the party for the ballot. And so that 2004 race that you're talking about, where I tied with the Democrat, was a three-way race. The Republican came in third, and then the Democrat and I actually tied. We did a recount, and I saw all the ballots, and it was a tie election on the way the ballots should have been counted, in my view. And of course, I learned that people mark, they have these ballots that are double marked. People would change their mind and erase or put a mark somewhere that the machine counts. And there were ballots for the Democrat that were marked the same way. But I didn't contest those because I agreed with the recount board that the intent of the voter was clear. And but the Democrat didn't agree with these votes you're talking about. So once the recount board declared it a tie, I was appointed by the governor, because the statute in Montana, that's the process. The governor appoints in the case of a tie for the legislature. And immediately the Democrats had one of their electors file a lawsuit challenging the election. Well, to do that, they had to file the case. They had to name me as the defendant. So yep. Here I was being sued. I didn't count the ballots. I wasn't accused of violating any laws or doing anything unethical, but I was getting sued. And long story short, that went to the district court upheld the decision of the recount board, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and they overturned it in a very, I won't get into the details, but I thought they were very blatantly political. They didn't follow the statute, and then they ordered me to pay the attorney's fees for the Democrat for suing me, which I refused to do. Oh. And so I got my property liened on that whole thing, and the attorney confiscated my bank accounts, etc. But yeah, so in that session, Brent, once they overturned the recount board, the Democrats controlled, even though it was 50-50 in the House, because under the statute, we had a Democrat governor at the time, and the party of the governor was determined to be the Speaker of the House. So, but then 2 years later, just to finish the story, it was just the opposite. The folks in the valley here in the district were so upset, significantly to the point of indignation, I would say, that the next election in 2006, I ran against a Democrat, and I won by over 500 votes. And ironically, it ended up being the same situation where there was 49 50 Republicans, 49 Democrats, and me. So I ended up as the deciding vote, so to speak, in the legislature in the 2007 session, although it wasn't a matter of which party was in control, because I wasn't a member of either of the major parties. I was a Constitution Party member. So anyway, that's kind of that story.
Well, fascinating. What's this personhood amendment thing in Montana?
Well, I sponsored the personhood amendment, what's referred to as the personhood amendment, in 2007. And that's the first effort to do so. And it was a constitutional amendment that recognized that human life begins at conception, which I believe is the root of the abortion argument. And therefore we amended the Constitution under the Due Process Clause, and so from the time of conception, a human being would be entitled to due process under that provision, and therefore not subject to violation of life, liberty, or property without due process. I think that's the essence of the abortion argument, and everything else goes by the wayside as long as that's the premise.
Well, I'm going to read something here from the internet about you. It says that Jore has been described as a no-compromise conservative and as one of the most conservative legislators in Montana. Jore, that's you, Rick Jore, supports an original intent approach to interpreting the U.S. Constitution, stating, quote, "The concept of a living Constitution is, in my mind, an absolute perversion." Can you explain for the listeners what you understand original intent to mean and why the idea, first do that, and then we'll talk about the living Constitution as a perversion. Obviously, those two are the two opposite positions, the way you've presented them. But start with original intent, if you would, Rick.
Okay, Brent, I'll do my best, and I'm sure both of you have insight into this whole thing that you could articulate probably better than me. But what I view as original intent is when the document is ratified and put forth by the Constitutional Convention, that words mean something, that the intent of the document has to be followed. Jefferson had a great, I wish I had it in front of me, quote about not stretching the words beyond their logical meaning. And so if you're going to take an oath to a document and it doesn't have and you assume that it can be interpreted however you want, and the next guy can interpret it however he wants, then you don't have a document. You really don't. It's to me, the Constitution represents an absolute, if you will. It's a representation of the rule of law. The words mean what they should be interpreted to mean what they were intended to mean, and we have voluminous writings from those men that were there and composed the document on what they intended, and to the point where I can't comprehend an excuse of not adhering to the original intent. So,
well, you're in good company. There are Supreme Court justices that take the same position, but then those Supreme Court justices, for example, that take the other position and say the Constitution is a living document. What does that mean in your understanding?
In my understanding, a living document is that it can change however we decide is convenient and necessary at the time. And I wish I had it in front of me, Brent. I could grab it off the shelf behind me, but I'm betting you're familiar with Tucker's Constitutional Law Commentary, John Randolph Tucker.
You introduced me to it at one time.
Okay.
Years ago. Go ahead.
And he talks about that that the idea of constitutional government, how he doesn't use the phrase living document, but he explains the perversion, how that by convenience or court cases that it can be amended contrary to its own terms simply by reinterpretation. And I think that's dangerous. And I would say I'm not doing a very good job of explaining the living Constitution concept, I don't think, but here's what I would like to, the point I would like to make, Brent, is I mentioned to you on the phone the other day that the thing that hit me as I began to read, as I was searching on how to apply the scriptures in every area of life, I came to it was Francis Schaeffer that, and all of his books that had a huge impact on me. And when I understood the significance of worldview presuppositions, that's when it really hit me how that the truth of the scriptures is total truth. And when Jesus says, I'm the truth, that means he's total truth, or else he's not really the truth. And how I understand total truth is that it's truth that applies in every area of life and in all things, all disciplines, all occupations. And the living Constitution theory rests on what I view is entirely contrary to biblical presuppositions. It's an evolutionary presupposition that says this rule of law can evolve with the whims of the majority, or usually it's not even the majority, it's whoever has the most power. But law and justice and ethics and morality become evolutionary, if you will. And I abhor that notion. I think it's dangerous and illogical. And I would contend that the living Constitution theory and doctrine is entirely conducive. Well, let me say it this way, that the notion of democracy based on the whims of the fickle majority are a tool to undermine the rule of law and implement this changing notion of law and ethics and justice, totally contrary to, in my view, to writings like Blackstone and Rutherford. I love Lex Rex, for example, the concept that I learned a lot from that. The law is the rule. The law is the king, Rutherford said. The king is not the law, you know. Yeah. And I see a huge, I'll have to use the word ignorance about that within our government and within the legislature. It's become arbitrary.
Dan, are you there?
Yes.
Well, I'm having a go at him. Do you have any questions?
Well,
Rick, to comment on?
Yeah, this isn't my original thought, but somebody explained if you don't go back to the basis or the facts of the Constitution, it's like a carpenter laying out a wall, and every 16 inches he's long or short an eighth of an inch, and in 8 feet that's 1 inch off. So you gotta get to the original intent. Like Rick was saying, words are important, and the other side is stealing our words.
Oh,
and just like in case law in court, you get a bad case, and then they build off of that bad case, and they build off of that bad case. Pretty quick, you're an inch off a square, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
It does. Now, what I'd like to do is, if you fellows are all right with this, and if you have time, Rick, and Dan as well, 2 state legislators, former state legislators from Montana, can you come back and do another clip with us? And this is Brent Allan Winters and Montana Dan, elders at In Church, and we're kicking it, as they say, with a former state legislator by the name of Rick Jore, and getting his take on some things that have happened in Montana and are happening in Montana. There's more to talk about than we can talk about, but keep an eye out for the next posting we do. This is Brent Allan Winter, Dan Scadam, and we're talking to Rick Jore.